Okay, at the request of a friend, I'm going to record how I mix my yeast bread. It's my super simple recipe. It's got 4 cups of flour, 1 teaspoon of instant yeast, 2 teaspoons of salt, and 1.5 cups of warm water. Now you will need a little extra flour when you start kneading it. Now generally, I do it by hand because I don't have a big stand mixer, but I do have a small hand mixer that I got as a gift January 1st, 1983. It has dough hooks. It can do a single batch. It can't handle a double. So I do them one at a time. Anyway, I've already measured my 4 cups of flour. Now, I know a lot of people don't, but I do this. I sift it. I don't use a regular sifter. I just use a strainer. It works great. The reason I do this is it's easier to mix the yeast and the salt in together when your flour is nice and loose, and you get a much nicer consistency to your bread. Okay, so there's my 4 cups of flour. Now, you're going to use 1 teaspoon of yeast. Now, this package is just a little tiny bit over 1 teaspoon. So if I was doing a double batch, it would just be perfect. So, there's my 1 teaspoon of yeast. Now, just 2 tablespoons of salt. You could use kosher salt, you could use sea salt, as long as it's fine ground. You don't want crunchy bread. So if you kind of cut it in half as you go, 4 cups of flour, 2 teaspoons of salt, 1 teaspoon of yeast. It's really easy to remember. Okay. So there's 1 teaspoon of salt. And I need just a little bit more. Sorry about my voice being rough. I had a coughing attack earlier. Okay. And I don't measure it over my bread. Okay, I had a little bit extra. And I don't want it in my yeast either. So there's my 2 teaspoons. Okay, so I'm going to move my yeast out of the way. I'm going to get my measuring spoons out of the way. Don't need my measuring cup anymore. Now, I don't have a huge area to work. I would love to have a massive kitchen. I don't. Okay, I love these little tiny spatulas I got out of school fundraiser once. I bought several sets. I like it better than the larger ones. Always mix your yeast and salt together, okay? Always, with your flour. And mix it in good, because once it's wet, it's not going to mix together, and you'll end up with very strange little lumpy bumpies. Okay, so that's ready. Now, 1.5 cups of warm water. I actually use my coffee maker to get really nice warm water, but it's not boiling. So I am going to measure 1.5 cups. I always set your cup down to measure, because if you try to hold it up and measure, you're not going to get an exact measure. So I just there's my 1 cup. I came out just a tad short, so I'll add just a little bit to it. Okay. Move that out of my way. I like to keep things out of my way since I don't have a lot of room. Okay. So I'm going to take my spatula, I'm going to kind of stir it together. Now I should mention before, I have washed my hands very well to start with. Okay, the reason I stir it together before I put my little hand blender in it is it'll throw it all over the place. The hand blender will save time. It starts coming together really well. Okay. Well, that was fun. Okay. I always have a lot of towels around to use. Get that. Okay, so now it's going to get noisy. You don't want to just stick it in there and go 90 miles an hour. You take it easy, okay? I would love to be using a big blender, but since I don't have it. Now, did you hear the blender change tone? It went from a high pitch like this to lower. Doesn't take long. Pick it up and move it. Okay. It comes together very rapidly. Okay. Make sure to get all the dough off your hooks if you're using dough hooks. Okay. Now, this is where you need a little bit of extra flour, because as you knead it together, you're going to have to add some flour to your hands and to the dough. Okay. So, put a little bit on my hands, sprinkle a little bit over the dough. It's not going to need a lot, trust me. I don't want my hands to stick to it, okay? Now, I'm going to roll it over a little bit. Add a tiny bit more flour because it is sticky. You don't want it sticky. Last thing you want is sticky dough. Okay, now, I'm going to throw the bowl across the kitchen. No, there's a wall over there, but I hope you can't see because it really needs painting. Okay. Now, you do not want to over knead this dough. You do want it to come together to where it's a nice consistency. I'm feeling it a tiny bit sticky right in this area, so I'll sprinkle just a little tiny bit more. I'll just put a little bit in the bottom of the bowl, because that way if I'm saying okay it needs a little bit, I could just dab it in there like that. Okay, so see how it's already nice and stretchy? That's good looking dough. I like that. This is going to be a good loaf of bread. Good loaf. Okay. I'm not going to do a whole lot more. This is a little bit stickier than normal. I'm wondering if I did not get one of my cups of bread completely full. Now, feeling good. See how it stretches? Comes, okay? I like that. Good bread. I like bread. I don't like store-bought bread, I admit it. I'm not a bread snob, but I like to know what I'm in my eating, okay? I'm teaching science. I know what a lot of these words you can't pronounce are, and I sure don't want to eat them, and I don't want my family to eat them either. Or my friends that I share with. Okay, so, now, see how it pulls? Looking good. It's not sticking to me horribly. Little bit. Don't like that. Don't like that at all. Okay. I think part of it might also be because it's really warm in here. But I waited until afternoon to do this because generally it takes about 4 hours to rise if it's a little cool. Now, if you have an area you can warm it to let it rise, that'll work great. Okay, so Now, what you're going to do, get some oil. I am a huge fan. No, they don't pay me to say this. I love this extra virgin olive oil. So, I'm going to get my other bowl, put a little bit of oil in it. Okay, didn't need that much. I usually use the smaller bottle, but it's empty. And I am going to make sure it is all the way around the sides. You don't want your bread to dry out, okay? So now I'm going to pick up my loaf. I'm going to put it in here, and I'm going to turn it a couple of times. I want to make sure it is completely covered, okay? Now, what I'll do is I will cover this bowl, and it's going to have to rise until it doubles in size. So I've got all this extra room. It'll be up about here when it's done rising. That may be a second video because I'm not real good on editing and putting things together. So, I'm going to wipe my hands off. I'm going to get my little square towel, and I'm going to cover that up. Okay? So that's how you mix the bread. From here it's going to rise. Then I'm going to shape it into a rectangle. Then it gets about 10 to 15 minutes to rest. And then I will form it into the loaf, put it into a 5x9 pan, and it gets to rise for another hour. You'll see that either later on this video or on a separate video. Thank you.